For our next task, we need to then apply any drivers, any hardware drivers that this server may also require. Now, this is a bit different here because we're working with the server core and or full GUI version of the operating system than what we saw back in that immediately previous module there with Nano Server. When you're installing Nano Server, as we'll talk more about here in just a minute, there are quite a bit fewer drivers that are available directly out of the box unless you install a special package. But with the real version of Microsoft Windows, with the full version or the server core version, when you're installing those drivers, most of the drivers you need to just get bootstrapped up are usually available for a lot of the hardware that exists out there. But that said, there are also drivers that your manufacturer will require. Maybe you have special network card drivers or disk drivers that you want to make available. Well, having those drivers then exist there as part of the WIM file during the installation means that your plug and play function there on your then installing copy of Microsoft Windows, that plug and play can actually go through identifying what hardware exists and then automatically using the driver because it happens to be pre-staged there conveniently right there inside the WIM. So you may want to take an available driver that you have, just pick any driver that exists there in your IT store. If you don't have a driver available, take a look at VMware Workstation there if you're using Workstation on your desktop. In the program files x86, then /VMware/VMware Workstation folder, you'll find an ISO file there called windows.iso, which I'm merely using here as an example of where we can get access to some of the drivers that we can use. Let me copy or make a copy of that file there from my host machine, so my actual desktop that you can't see here into the My Desktop instance that we're working with here. I show you this again because this just provides us access to some drivers that we can work with that we may all have access to see. So this ISO file, let me put it in a new location here. In fact, let's come here to our C drive and to our Hyper-V location. Let's create then a folder here called Drivers. Then once we've got that, let's actually take a look at the drivers themselves. Let me then mount this ISO file. And then there inside of Program Files and VMware Tools are, in fact, a pair of drivers for SCSI and PV-SCSI that include all the necessary driver files for actually getting the driver installed on a computer. Again, whenever you fully unpack your drivers, you'll ultimately make your way all the way down to these individual files. They usually include things like a sys file, an INF file, a cat file, an OEM file, and then also a couple of other files, depending on what the driver is. We want to take both of these two driver folders and then copy them into the appropriate location here in our Hyper-V folder. So here under Hyper-V in the drivers location, let me just copy the PV-SCSI and SCSI subfolders here into this location. This will then allow us to, in a single command, add all of these driver files to have them available for the installer as that installer goes through creating that instance there of Windows Server 2016. You would want to do this, a single folder for each driver for whatever custom drivers that you have available and at your disposal. So let me close this and then close this down here and bring back our PowerShell command prompt here so that we can go through the addition of these drivers there into the WIM file that we're working with. Let us do add Windows driver here with the path being that C offline location, with the driver then being essentially the driver folder that we're working with being C Hyper-V drivers and then the -recurse parameter. This -recurse parameter tells it to essentially install every driver in every subfolder that you find in that drivers folder itself. And so running this, as you see, takes just a second or so to complete. But what it does is install those drivers there into our mounted WIM image that we're working with here. Pretty cool stuff, yeah? Every environment I think I've worked with has an IT share on some file server somewhere, and every environment also usually has a drivers subfolder on that IT share. There's nothing that says you couldn't just unpack all the drivers in that location, put them in their own folder structure, and then add them directly into your Windows image to have them available and kind of reduce the need for some of those extra steps that may be required after you complete the initial installation. One gotcha I should mention here is that some drivers actually have exe files that wrap the files that we talked about here. A lot of times you have video drivers that install software in addition to the driver itself. So your mileage may vary here. Sometimes the drivers won't necessarily work this way, but it's a worthwhile test to see what kinds of drivers you may want to work with here across all those that are needed for your servers.